Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Happiness Index podcast. My name is Stefan Tornquist, and I'm the lead author of the Global Workplace Happiness Report. And I'm also the co founder of Executive Summary Research. Now, for the next few weeks, I'm still going to be borrowing Matt Phelan's host chair to interview the experts and the authorities and the academics who have contributed to this report. Now, today we're going to be talking about innovation. And my guest is Dr. Rochelle Haynes of you're the CEO of Crowd Potential Consulting. I was about to say of the Crowd Potential Consulting, but that doesn't make any sense. Rochelle
Yes.
is also the author of Open HR. Now, Rochelle, why don't we start with what do you do at Crowd Potential? And then we'll dig into the essay that you've written for us about the connection between employee well-being and innovation.
Absolutely. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Stefan. And really, what I do is help companies redesign for the current work context and the current workforce. And sometimes that starts from rebuilding structures from the ground up. As you know, the workplace is becoming a lot more dynamic. The type of work we use, the type of labor is a lot more mixed in terms of full-time, part-time, independent, AI. So what I do is help companies create internal systems that allow them to get the best engagement from their workforce and produce the best results.
Fair enough. And it doesn't seem like there'll be any shortage of work on that front for a while.
At
Uh,
all. At all.
so, your essay, to give people a sense of context from the report, there's a section on the return on happiness, is what that section is called. And we look at how workplace well-being connects to equity value, so the
Mhm.
stock price of companies, historical and forward looking. We look at resilience and we look at innovation. And so I'm really happy you're here because I think for a lot of listeners who are maybe more on the business side than the people side,
Mm.
either they still need some convincing that there's a direct, you know, movable, significant connection, or they believe it, but they're looking for help in proving it to the organization. So that's what
Mm.
this section of the report does,
Yeah.
is really connect the black and white for the cynical. Um,
Love it.
so you start your essay by saying that the way we design teams and work structure, it matters more now than ever before. I think in your description of what you do, we have the hook. But why do you maintain that it's never been more important?
Because our context is rapidly changing and our organizations are not keeping up with those changes. And in a place, or let's say a business environment where you have employees staying primarily due to uncertainty, then it hides a lot of deeper issues, especially disengagement. So a lot of companies, and we've seen some reports that have shown that employees, there is a bit of hesitancy in some cases to leave organizations when the external environment seems uncertain and in flux. But what's happening is you end up with a lot of quiet quitting. You end up with a lot of persons planning their next journey in the background. And as soon as they see a bit of stability, they jump ship. So you end up with a workforce where the productivity is significantly suppressed, the motivation is very low, and there's slower progress, sorry, unless organizations make a concerted effort to redesign the way that work gets done.
Hmm. And I would think that that would have there would be a couple of aspects where um, the ability to leave an organization is
Mhm.
not evenly distributed.
Absolutely.
And in most, certainly in, sort of highly skilled knowledge work and maybe in everything, the ability to leave is skewed towards the people you least want to leave. Is that
Absolutely. Yeah.
accurate?
And yeah, and we're seeing it now. I would say there's a global leadership shortage. There sometimes you see cases where the environment or the business environment reflects, let's say, there's more availability of talent than jobs. But even in that context, which tends to be the best scenarios for organizations, even in that context, the skills that are still often the rarest to find are the skills that are at the very top and that result in the company's continuity and competitiveness. So your head people while everyone in your organization is valuable and they contribute in their own way, they contribute to specific projects, they contribute to keeping the organization alive, that top talent that's needed to keep the organization progressing into the future and maintain its competitiveness, these are the talents that are harder to find, they're harder to recruit, and they have the options of leaving, as you said, they have the option of leaving more than other organizations. But also because of the technology and the different ways of working, they don't necessarily have to be poached or leave for another organization. Many of them are choosing to work independently or pursue entrepreneurial ventures, having gained the experience that they have. So they're choosing to create their own organizations, which then in many cases becomes the competition of the organization, of the previous organization as well. So it's really worth designing a system that allows you to attract and maintain and engage that talent that you want to keep, whether you do that in a full-time capacity or whether that's done through contracting them as an independent resource, but making sure you have ongoing access to those skills.
Hmm. Well, and I would also think, in reference to innovation,
Uh-huh.
somebody doesn't need to leave to not be a great innovator. Like if innovation takes, you need to have the ideas and bring them to the company
Uh-huh.
instead of going off to start your own
Yeah.
thing or bring them to a competitor. But you also need to innovation's a risk-taking activity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you can't have a very safe, flat, innovative like it has to be safe, but you can't have just sort of standard operating procedure and uh innovation takes that risk of saying, well, this could be different or better,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that you're kind of there are going to be people who are perhaps resistant, or the first line of answers might be like, well, but that's not the way we do it, or all
Yeah.
of the things that are just endemic to especially larger organizations, but even mid-sized.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not fully engaged,
Mm-hmm.
why bother?
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Uh,
you don't need to even have a foot out the door if you're like, well, yeah, it could be this could be an amazing product, or, I've noticed this, gap in service, but why
yeah.
bother?
Yeah.
Uh,
And you see that frustration in organizations, especially across multi-generational talent. You often see as scenarios where, for example, younger talent, who we would label typically as Gen Z or millennial talent, often get frustrated in a lot of companies because they see opportunities for innovation, but they're constantly rejected or they're turned down because, as you said, they're told this is not how things are done. So they go away and they create those opportunities for someone else, or they build their own solutions as well. So if we want to keep a very engaged, multi-generational, innovative workforce, then we have to be open to reframing the way that work is done and reframing the way that organizations are designed to do work.
mhm. Yeah, I think right now, given that, the demands on the talent world in raw numbers have dropped. Now, granted,
Mhm.
it's still very sharp in certain skill areas, but I think
Yeah.
probably people should perceive this as a loss of potential rather than well, I might lose 5% of my workforce over
Mm.
prediction to attrition. Yeah, that's not the problem. It's the best people and the best ideas that are leaving the.
That's
Uh,
it. And that's what we see significantly. So even where you have cases where there are very few positions, it's thinking about the positions that matter the most to the strategic outcome that you're hoping to achieve. So while you may have, let's say, for example, a plethora of talent because maybe you're in a business environment where there are less jobs and more talent, still do the jobs that are, let's say, in great numbers, are those the jobs and the skills that contribute primarily to the longevity and the strategic objectives of your company?
how do we know if somebody's engaged or not?
There are usually signs. I would say there are a lot of signs. For example, you have you've probably heard of discretionary behavior. You often see where people aren't engaged, they're less likely to give you ideas. They're less likely to go that extra mile for the company. They may come to work and just do the basic. I've had jobs before myself, but years ago, before I started working for myself, where when I got a feel of what the context was like, if I didn't like it, I just chose to do the bare minimum. I chose to do what I was expected to do and no more. And when, for example, you have companies might ask people to volunteer to do additional things, you don't get any input. Companies might ask for ideas to work a particular project or solve particular projects, and employees refuse to participate. In many cases, and we see a lot of companies where employees show up on a daily basis and they're working on their exit strategy from within the company. So they're dedicating probably like 30-40% of their effort to the organizational goals, whereas the other 60% is going on, okay, how do I design what comes next? Because I'm not happy here. And many employees, as we know now, have portfolio careers. So they're working their main job, but then they have what I would call a side hustle, or 2 or 3 side hustles, this additional source of income from the outside. And many of those employees are actively working to make their side hustle their main hustle. So it's really important that companies try to solve their engagement problem and not just ignore it and see it, okay, we can just replace these people very quickly. Because even in replacing people, that's an additional cost for companies. That's an additional disruption and a reset that's needed. And also it interferes and disrupts the overall culture of the organization.
Is there any, so the way you discuss or identify that we might recognize a lack of engagement is sort of one-on-one, where a line manager or a coworker could be, aware. Are there any sick rates, or are there any shortcut metrics where somebody in the people function could say, we've been averaging 8% or whatever, I have no idea what the number is of the number of days missed outside of vacation time. But is there something like that where you could say, oh, it's gone up 3 days a quarter, that means
Yeah.
something? Or is it
You,
easy to
yeah.
overstate that kind of thing?
You can see signs in that way. So, for example, when you see increased sick days among your people, when you see people going out on longer leaves of absence due to sickness, when you see more like additional absence, or sometimes people refusing to come into the office, choosing more to work from home. Not necessarily that that's always the reason for working from home. Of course, people are very productive, but in some cases, people don't want to be in the environment. Also, attrition numbers and your turnover, looking at how many people are coming in and out of the company and in what span of time. Do many of your employees stay beyond a year, for example? Or are you constantly turning over employees within a year and a half? So those things tend to give um, they tend to give management and leadership an idea of what is the trend that's happening across the company. And that's where data analytics, sorry, can be really powerful as well. But you'll see it as well in the daily effort. You'll see it in meetings. You'll see it in the amount that people are willing to collaborate across teams and share ideas. So along with the metrics, there's also the behavioral patterns that you'll begin to see. And you'll
Right.
feel it as
Although
well.
if you're above, let's say middle management's probably the highest level of management that would have some perception of, what people are bringing to meetings. Like, um, if you're above that level, I think that at least what you're shown appears to be maximum effort. I mean, I could be way off on that. Um, and
Mm,
and in a larger organization with multiple regions and divisions, it's going to be harder to use sort of um, lived experience, that you're going to need data of some kind to identify an issue, I would think. uh,
mm,
so let's you started talking about sort of the increasingly complex world of work.
mm. Yeah.
um, and it's interesting in the data that that we're compiling for the report. the I don't know that you'll find this surprising, but the hierarchy is remote, hybrid, office, and then field folks who are in the field, roving salespeople or what have you.
Mm,
It's not quite universal, but it's the strongest determinant of how you do on the various output
Yeah.
questions. How happy are you? How well do you, even collaboration, how much you enjoy your team? Remote and remote first, and then a little bit behind it is hybrid, and then the
Yeah.
in-office workers, and then way a mile behind are the folks in the field. Are that is
That
not a
sounds about
happy.
accurate.
That's not an easy
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, do you find that surprising at all?
No, not at all. And it's one of the biggest frustrations with when we see these RTO mandates where they're forcing people back into the office. I think that's one of the worst things that companies can do. And I've seen where workers are unhappy, and to the earlier point of where workers are unhappy and seeking to be out of the office environment. I've seen people where companies issue that return to office mandate. They leave the company because
Oh yeah.
they're no longer in sync with that environment. And data consistently shows that people are more productive when they work remotely. And I mean, I'm not going to say that every situation suits remote work or hybrid work. And that's where the organization has to take the chance to actually audit and review their organizational structures and their priorities and their objectives and see what actually suits. I think often the issue that we get with remote work, hybrid work, full-time in-house work is that people pit them against each other. So it becomes this almost debate: is remote work better than in-office work? And I think that's always been the wrong debate or the wrong question. It should always have been, why can't we have more options of working in different ways? So it's not about go fully remote versus being going full-time employment. It's not either or. It's, why don't you provide employees or let's say, or talent with different ways of working, because people perform differently under different circumstances. People are at their best under different circumstances and within different times. So it's really important that organizations move away from this sort of industrial idea of work must be done through this 9 to 5 in-house structure, when we're very different individuals, we're very different people, and that's not where we get the best of productivity. So it should always be about promoting different ways of working and different options, rather than saying, oh, bring everybody back in full time. Oh, full time is better than remote. Oh, remote is better than full time. It's not about that. It's about opening the options for letting people be their most innovative selves.
Do you think that the debate that companies have before they make these decisions is really about what kind of work is most productive, or is it really a real estate and investment
Yeah.
argument that then they need to, like, well, we spent a lot of money on this
Yeah.
building, so we
Yeah.
think that it's most productive to be in the office. Like I
Yeah.
my
And in
cynicism is
many
showing,
cases,
but
yeah, I agree with that. And in many cases, it can be very selfish thinking. It's very employer-driven thinking. It's thinking about what's best for the
well,
employer.
yeah,
And
it's not even
yeah,
because what's best for the employer is high productivity, high innovation, high resilience, happy
mhm,
workforce. You make more
yeah,
money.
yeah,
Um, but that's maybe harder to measure than we just spent, 150 million pounds on a campus outside of London or whatever it is.
yeah,
We're going to use it. Um,
yeah.
or,
And you know
or
what's
conversely,
yeah,
there are certainly companies that have said, well, we're going to go all remote. And then there's a minority of folks, usually who are younger workers, who might miss
mhm,
out on some of the
mhm,
informal mentorship
yeah.
and training that you get in a hybrid or an office situation.
Yeah, so you just hit the nail on the head for why we advocate for redesigning the work environment. Because rather than thinking of those buildings as a place to just house employees and have employees 9 to 5, it's thinking about, well, if your employees want to work in a remote or hybrid way, or if they find that to be their best approach to enhance productivity or innovation, then how can we use or redesign our buildings in a way that it would better suit an environment where you have remote, hybrid, or in-house employees. So thinking about even how to use your workspace in a more creative way. I know a lot of companies that have invested in satellite offices, a lot of companies that have redesigned their building to be a more innovative space, to be a more co-working style space. So I was thinking also, if you have made that real estate investment, because you worked one way before. You're interested in making a shift towards hybrid or a more shift towards remote working, but you don't want to lose out on your investment. Then it's thinking about how can you redesign what already exists if you're unable to scale down in that sense. How can you redesign that within the piece of real estate that you've bought that promotes innovation for your remote hybrid in-house team?
Hmm. Yeah, I've been doing some research for around mid-sized companies,
Mm,
and what's funny about them is they can be very progressive and want to take advantage, but a lot of them sort of behave as if they're much larger companies. At least big companies have, nice stock packages. There's a lot we notice in the data that once you hit sort of the 1,000 employee plateau, people are generally, they at least feel more stable, safer, and their scores are generally pretty high. We see one peak for the very small company and then the largest companies. And there's kind of
yeah.
a trough in the middle. And I suspect, having seen how a lot of them are operating, is that you've got small companies that behave like very big ones, maybe because it's a number of acquisitions working together. And one of the telltale signs is this real stress on, like, well, we've got to be in the office. It's like you don't have the freedom of or the potential upside of a small company. You don't have the stability and salary of a big company, and you're not offering the number one benefit that people want, which is flexibility and autonomy.
Mm,
And that seems like a loser to me. Um,
yeah. Yeah.
so what when you're talking to a client who's looking at their cross-functional,
Mhm.
cross-working structures, where do you
Yeah.
start? What is your, like, you conduct an audit, then what?
Yeah, it's first really understanding what you're trying to achieve. I think in many cases where cross-functional teams go wrong is because they're thrown together without a plan for communication, without a plan for what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and without any real clarity in terms of how decisions are made and who decides what. So I would say some really practical moves to reduce friction when you're working in cross-functional teams is from the get-go, design the 2 or 3 outcomes that everybody can own together, that your entire team can own. What does that look like? What does success look like for you across this team? But also make it very clear where are the decision lines, where are the communication lines and windows as well. What is the frequency and how do we use different communication channels? You shouldn't be using the same communication channel or several communication channels in the same way because that can get very you're duplicating a lot, and also it can get very confusing and overwhelming. You should decide, for example, which communication lines would be used in urgent situations versus which would be used, let's say, to contact someone who might be out of the office during a certain window, whatever the case. And most importantly is to document what you do. See it almost as a pilot. So as if you're starting off working with a cross-functional team for the first time, or you're trying to make that shift towards hybrid and more blended work, then see it as almost an experiment where you document how things are done. You write down how decisions are made. You make sure every member of that team has equal access to information, and that highlights how the process works. But it's really important to start small. I tend to say think evolution and not revolution. Start small, start with a particular project or practice, document as you go along, and then based on the success of that and your review of that, think of how we can scale that to, let's say, a larger group or a larger project. But it's really about being explicit and being really clear about what you're trying to achieve rather than thinking about that at the end
People don't historically love documentation.
at all.
Is there a way um, that you can apply artificial intelligence to, sort of take some of that institutional memory, input how things are done, and have it do some of the documenting?
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that now with agentic AI. We're seeing a lot of it with, I mean, initially when ChatGPT first came on the market, you have a lot of people using those as assistants. You have Gemini, you have these different programs, but then you have this project management software, the traditional Asana, Trello, and things like these, which help the process to help you to document in more bite-sized portions. And in many cases where we're talking about AI, it will do some of the documentation for you if you put in the right parameters. So it's really important to use the technology that's available to you, but make sure that you're guiding the technology in the right way, as opposed to just creating, like traditionally, loads of files and loads of reviews and loads of meetings, which, as you
Right.
said, is nobody's cup of tea.
Well, and even with something like Trello, which is a great piece of tech, but at least my experience is there will be, let's say there's an 8-person team. There will be one person, maybe two, who's really good with Trello. It suits their personality, but 6 out of 8 are like, great, he's the Trello guy. And yeah, let's never speak of it again. And I would, the conversational interface of large language models, sure, there's some, an error rate to consider, and you've got to always have one eye on your AI and what it's saying and doing. But
Yeah.
to me, one of the most interesting aspects is the democratization of communication with this tech. That the when you look at anywhere in the tech stack,
Hmm.
and I the number of steps between, oh, I've had this is something I'm interested in testing or implementing, fielding, whatever, and it happening, you're 800 clicks away or something. Whereas a conversational interface, and you need to know why you're doing each one. So there tends to
Hmm.
be, people who are keeping that knowledge, and they'd be happy to
Yeah.
share it with you, but you'd want to blow your brains out if they did. And anyway, not to be too sunshine and roses, but the
Yeah.
ability of the AI to both make the little leaps so you don't need to, and when you just tell it like, oh, show me this, show me an analysis of X,
Hmm.
assuming it's not making up
Yeah.
the numbers, you don't have to understand your full web analytics system or what have you. And
Yeah.
in and
Yeah.
in
And it
this
goes back to
application that
how you,
oh, sorry, go
yeah,
on.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying in this application of
Mhm.
documentation, that seems like a potential, an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to what we were saying before about being very clear up front about how you use your communication channels. So, what are you using Trello for? How are you using that to engage with the team? How are you using something like Monday.com? And I do like Monday.com. It's very good for providing particular analytical reports, or providing templates for proposals, which can make things a lot easier. But in terms of being, I think the main thing is to be very upfront about what are the tools and why are we using specific tools, rather than having everybody try to use as many tools as possible or duplicating tools, making sure there's a strategy for that. So having your communication strategy in place, which is directly going to feed into how information is documented as well.
So let's go back to the innovation itself.
Hmm.
What does good sort of ongoing innovation require, um, in terms of people design, that if we haven't already touched on it? And then how does the hybrid or remote work play a part? Like, the conventional wisdom would be, well, when you have a notion, it's best to be in a room with people knocking
Hmm.
these ideas around. Or if you have to have
Yeah.
difficult conversations about the implications of things, that maybe that's best in person, or maybe not. What do you think?
I think is to understand your team. When you understand your team first, then it becomes very clear what should be the priority and what should be the rhythm and the strategy that you create, rather than trying to design a template that perhaps was used in another organization. Perhaps companies have discovered it through some other way, but it might not necessarily be suited within their context. So it's to understand your team. What are you working towards? What is the personality, the culture within the team? What is preferred and what is the support that's also needed? When you have an idea, for example, and through your getting to know your teams, through your audit of the skills and the persons that you've included in your team, getting to understand where the strengths and weaknesses are, getting to understand how often support is needed, understanding how people work best, then that can help companies make decisions that are and create a strategic plan for hybrid work or otherwise that is suited to what will help them to be innovative rather than trying to apply a blanket solution across. So, for example, you might have teams that they do their best work perhaps when they come in and they have a bit of a workshop at the beginning of the week around let's say a round table or in a room. They maybe they take a sort of sprint or scrum approach where they just come in, they have their stand-ups and they have their interactions, their power hour, whatever the thing might be. And that might set them up to work well on a hybrid basis or a remote basis during the week. They go off, they understand what they need to do, and they go off and they do it. Whereas other teams, dependent again on the nature of the individuals within your team, depending on the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and also the nature of the project, that might not necessarily be seen as the best approach to take. So I think when you understand your team and understand what they need, then you get a better sense of whether or not maybe it's worth having them in the office 2 or 3 times a day first, a week, sorry, 2 or 3 times a week to get that initial collaboration and ideas going, or if they're fully capable of doing that remotely as well.
Um, I I hope you couldn't hear my dog having a nightmare in the next room. She
Definitely not.
it's it's a very baleful noise, um,
No,
doleful
no.
noise. Um, so let's end the official part of the
Mhm.
podcast or my questions with
Yeah.
you mentioned the importance of the shift towards skills-based or skills-first environments.
Yeah.
And I think you talk about how that's particularly important in light of the rise of tech. So I where do you rather than talking about what skills we might want to emphasize, why is this what people should be thinking about?
The skills-based environment, it helps to free up a lot of hidden talent. And talent this time, I mean, not just in terms of people, but in terms of the skills that people possess. In many ways, a lot of companies, they're suppressing or they're limiting the capacity that their employees can contribute to the organization by sure, mainly by the way that the work is designed, by the way that the job is structured. So in many cases, a job might be structured according to, let's say, you have a job description that designs that describes an account manager. It describes the traditional skills and the degrees, whatever the case is that that person take. They come into the organization, into the accounts department, and they take a very sort of linear approach to their career, where they advance in that accounts department and onwards. A skills-based approach says um, consider hiring not just based on, let's say, particular discipline, but consider what are the other skills that might be needed to solve problems right across the organization. So thinking about perhaps having a database where you have several projects in your company that need solving across different departments. Who are the people across different departments that can help contribute to solving those problems? I often give the example when I speak at conferences of, let's say a young accountant assistant or whatnot, who perhaps in their spare time is an excellent DJ and an excellent graphic designer, who might do some coding, who might have their little Etsy shop online. What are those transferable skills that they have developed through being able to manage all of these external projects that they can lend into the company to solve some of your biggest problems? But when we box them into this, specifically into roles, then it very much limits the capacity that they can give and the capacity that they can share. And the other benefit of having that sort of skills-based, project-based approach as well, especially in an increasing blended workforce where people are working full-time, independently and whatnot, is that it makes work a lot more interesting for people. we find a lot of, for example, Gen Z. We've seen several reports about millennials and Gen Z uh, who leave organizations a lot more quickly than their predecessors. In many cases, they don't feel challenged. They don't find purpose in the work, or perhaps they don't like how the work is being done, or they feel like they lack autonomy. They come into the job and they're told, you're an accountant, you're an accounting manager. These files are what you're supposed to work on. I want you to work on them in this specific way. And they might say, well, what about this way? This actually might work better for this department, but also this can extend further. And you say, no, that's not your remit. Stick to this. You're losing the opportunity to innovate with not only within the department, but across the organization. And where those individuals get consistently frustrated, many of them leave. They move on for more interesting opportunities. And I know myself as a millennial, I can tag myself. I have been a person to do this, where if I don't feel challenged in a job, I move on. And that's not everybody, but we have seen, and we've heard from several companies who've experienced these sort of differences and preferences across different generations. So the skills-based approach gives organizations an option of redesigning and filling that gap between becoming job-based versus becoming skills-based, or not just going on skills-based hiring, but thinking of what a skills-based organization looks like as a whole. And that, I think, is really where the innovation would come about. That's your team becomes.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense to me. The I mean, and another plus of skills-based hiring is hopefully it moves slightly away from like where the interview has so much impact on who gets hired and who doesn't.
Mhm.
Even though, I mean, there's no end to the studies that show interviews are the worst way of determining who to hire.
Yes,
You end
absolutely.
up hiring
So,
people that you're like, oh, they laughed at my jokes. Where we
mhm.
share enough that I feel comfortable with this person. Well, that's not unimportant, but
Yeah.
it's not the determinant of who's going to do the best job necessarily either.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that time and time again within the HR field as people leaders, but it's still something that people prefer because they tend to like to, as you said, get a feel of people. But as you said, it can be very deceiving, you know? And one of the things that it tends to create as well, interviews, is a sort of groupthink mentality. People talk about wanting a culture fit when really and truly they should be looking for a culture add. You don't want everybody in the company reflecting. While yes, you may want persons that are able to get along with others, and that speaks more to softer skills. You don't, a lot of companies end up hiring people that are exactly like the other people in the company. So again, you're limiting your ability to think in different ways. You're limiting the various perspectives that you get. Whereas you think about how can this person add to the culture and what are the additional things that they might offer, then we get outside of that boxed in thinking that's often encouraged in interviews.
Yeah, I mean, and plus, an interview is like a first date. You know,
Yeah. All the
should, you
impression
know,
management. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Who after 5 years is still bringing their A game every day to that
Yeah.
same interaction. Well,
Yeah.
Rochelle, thank you very much. Before you go, we like to
Mhm.
ask two things at the end of these podcasts. And the first is, what's making you happy?
What is making me happy? Being home. So I recently moved from the UK to Barbados, and I've lived in the UK on and off for 17 years. And for the last year and a half, I have been kind of doing a half-half approach, a snowbird approach, where I spend 6 months in the UK and 6 months in Barbados. And I've decided that I want to be based in Barbados for now. And it is just amazing to be home, the environment, the atmosphere, the sun, the sea, my family, my friends, just having it all in one space. And yeah, as an island person, and many Caribbean people would attest to this, you don't realize just how much you miss being near a body of water.
I grew up on the
Yes.
ocean and I
Yeah.
absolutely, I mean, it was not Barbados. It was in the Northeast of the US.
Yeah.
So our swimming season's a lot shorter.
Yeah.
But if you grew up on the ocean, you never lose that pull.
Yeah, like literally as soon as we finish this interview, I'm going to join a friend to co-work and then we're going for a swim immediately after.
Nice. All right. Well, then just one more question, which is what's on your horizon? What are you excited about?
There's several things. So I've started working with a lot of new clients who are very interested in reconstructing the way that they work. So I get very excited when I see more and more organizations trying to work in a different way. Um, on top of that, as you know, we wrote the myself and my business partner Jeremy Blaine, we wrote the Open HR book a couple years ago, and we're now pursuing additional research to make sure that that book stays ahead of the time because we would have published that in 2024. So now we're
Hmm.
doing additional research about the state of work and the nature of workforce innovation. And that study will be coming out later this year as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how things have evolved since we've written and put out that piece of work. And actually, yeah, publishing, let's say 2.0.
Oh, that's great. Well, I don't want to speak for Matt Phelan, who's the real host of this podcast, but I'm betting you'll be back on for
Yeah,
the publication of the book. Dr.
absolutely.
Haynes,
Happy to.
Rochelle, thank you so much for your time, and we're all
Thank
very
you.
glad for you. I'm in the Northeast. A lot of our listeners are in London. It's early March. We're going to pretend to be happy for you.
Um, I'm sending you loads of sunshine and positive vibes.
Thank you very much. And thank
Thank
you all
you.
for coming and wow, I'm really belaboring this goodbye. Thank you all for coming.